Hey everybody, it's Christopher with the Georgia Coaster Connection, and it is time to talk about one of my favorite things in this world, and that is roller coasters, which, if you know me, you know that is not a big surprise. I hope everything's going well for you wherever you may happen to be while you're listening to this. And today, the specific thing I want to talk about is 3 things that I love and 3 things that I do not love about Goliath at Six Flags over Georgia. That's located in Austell, Georgia, not too far away from the Atlanta airport. Goliath is a B&M hypercoaster. It opened up in 2006, and it cost Six Flags $20 million. And this was the tail end of a time when Six Flags was willing to spend that kind of money on a major thrill coaster. In fact, in 2006, Six Flags opened some other major coasters in the chain. There was Goliath at La Ronde. There was Tatsu at Magic Mountain, and then there was El Toro at Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey. And I went into the inflation calculator, and in today's dollars, that $20 million investment would be a little over $28 million in 2022. And I just cannot imagine Six Flags spending that kind of cash on a roller coaster today. But Goliath, it's a top 25 roller coaster for me. And at the time of recording this, I have 315 credits in my coaster count. So I'd say it's in pretty good company. And often it will battle with Twisted Cyclone as my favorite ride in the park. And more often than not, Goliath will get the nod as my overall favorite. Sometimes they battle, but most of the time it's Goliath. So before I jump in and talk about these 3 things that I love and don't love about Goliath, a few stats just to give you some context of Goliath as a coaster. The first is that it's got a little under, almost said over, but it's under 4,500 feet of track. The top height is 200 feet, and the first drop is only 175 feet. And so I know this probably gets into the debate of, well, is it a real hyper? Is it a mini hyper? And I mean, this is like the Orion debate, except here, the top height is under 300 feet. And the drop is actually what makes it a giga. I'm not going to try to, well, I was going to say I'm not going to get into the argument. I guess I already said what I think. I believe Orion is a giga and Goliath is a hypercoaster. So another stat is that it hits a top speed of 70 miles an hour. So those are some quick stats about Goliath. Let's dive in and talk about 3 things that I love and don't love about Goliath at Six Flags over Georgia. And let's start with the positive, and that is the abundance of airtime. And so I counted 9 moments of overall airtime on Goliath. And that is from the first drop all the way to the final breaks, 9 total moments of airtime. And to me, the airtime is really good. And I dare say it's quality airtime. There's not a moment of elite airtime on Goliath, but it's all really solid. In fact, something else that I discovered recently is, everyone talks about Mako's 5-second airtime hill. And I went actually just about 3 weeks ago from the time that I recorded this, Georgia Coaster Connection had a Goliath marathon. And we rode Goliath 31 times, which we did the math, and that actually equated to about 26.2 miles of track covered in 31 rides, so hence an actual marathon. But as we were riding, I started to count the number of seconds of airtime that I was getting on those first few airtime hills on Goliath. And there's actually 2 5-second airtime hills on Goliath, and you don't hear people talk about that. It's not as strong as Mako's 5-second airtime, but it's still 2 5-second airtime hills, and you don't hear that talked about all that much. But Goliath definitely is the place to go in the park for airtime. Twisted Cyclone right behind it. Twisted Cyclone's airtime may be better, but you definitely get more of it on Goliath, and what you get on Goliath is really good. So that's the first thing that I love about Goliath is the abundance of airtime. Let's talk about something that I don't love. And I didn't want to say the word hate, by the way, because there's really nothing to truly hate about Goliath. And plus, I just don't like that word. But the first thing that I don't love about Goliath is that it's got a really shallow first drop. In fact, I checked it out and it's 59 degrees. And when you compare that to Mako, and I actually wrote this down so I wouldn't forget, Mako's first drop is 70 degrees and Goliath's is 59 degrees. And so you definitely don't get that gut punch that you would typically get going over a standard B&M Hyper first drop like Intimidator or Diamondback or Nitro or Raging Bull. Raging Bull in the back row is one of my favorite first drops. But shallow first drop at 59 degrees, not super great. Thankfully, Goliath does have 9-row trains. And so if you get in that back row, you can still get some pretty good whip over that first drop. The real money is actually in the second drop. It's the second drop that's longer, and I don't have the stat in front of me, but I'm pretty sure I've checked this, that the second drop is longer than the first drop. So interesting little stat about Goliath, and something that just makes it a quirky, I don't want to say non-traditional B&M Hyper, because then you think about Raging Bull, but it definitely has some quirks that are non-traditional. Another thing that I love about Goliath is it does not have any mid-course brakes, which really helps the pacing of Goliath out just a ton. There is one trim that happens in the valley after the helix. And sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't, but I've never really felt it affect the ride at any point. So I can't call that a con or something that I don't love. But I love the fact that there's not a formal mid-course brake run. I think it does wonders for Goliath's pacing. The second thing that I'm not so much in love with Goliath is the shakiness of the trains. And everyone that's ridden Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia usually brings this up. The B&M rattle, if that's what you want to call it. Now, I usually just call it shakiness, and it's usually more prevalent in rows 4 through 8. And even more specifically, it's on the outside seats. So if you sit on the inside seats in rows 4 through 8, it typically is okay. It's still a little shaky, but those outside seats are where you feel the shakiness the most in the valleys of the airtime hills. And it can really wear on you after a while. So Goliath is such an easy coaster to marathon, but when you're in rows 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8, and you're sitting on those outside seats, that shakiness can just grind on you after a while. Row 9, the very back row, actually pretty smooth. Obviously, the front row is pretty smooth as well, and rows 2 and 3 are okay, but rows 1 and row 9 are really where it's at as far as like a smoother experience on Goliath. Let me go ahead and close out the things that I don't love with something that's pretty minor, but something that I still think is worth calling out, and that's the paint job. And the paint job on Goliath is pretty faded. It's not like how Intimidator was pre-pandemic, where it was almost pinkish instead of red, but the colors on Goliath are really faded. Now, it's pretty minor, to be honest. I'm not a stickler for a coaster being repainted. It doesn't affect my enjoyment of the overall ride, but it was just interesting because so many other coasters in the last couple of years have received paint jobs. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the number of coasters that you've seen, B&M Painting show up and start painting. So it's something that's like, I wish we could have gotten it for Goliath, since just about every other coaster was getting a new coat of paint, but it's okay. It's a minor gripe, and that's why I listed it as the final thing that I don't love about Goliath. But let me end this with a positive, and that is the incredible operations of Goliath. And I may not have said this 2 years ago, but the ride ops that work at Goliath now, they hustle. And it's amazing how fast they will get a train out of the station and up the lift. And more often than not, Goliath is running 2 trains, which you could call another pro. But when Goliath's running 2 trains, more often than not, you have to slowly crawl up that hill to allow the second train to actually finish the course and get back into the station before the lift starts to pick up speed. And I think that's just a positive reflection on Goliath's operations. You see them hustle in the station, and they don't staple like they used to either. I used to be a real point of contention for me is that the constant stapling, and now you don't see that as much. It still happens occasionally, but No more so than it might happen to me at any other parks. I mean, it happens to me at Carowinds a lot now, and that never used to be the case. So shout out to the incredible ride ops of Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia. They have been just killing it recently. And there you go. 3 things that I love and 3 things that I don't love about Goliath at Six Flags Over Georgia. It's an incredible coaster, and it's one that I'm really happy to have at my home park. So thank you for listening. And if you want to check out my coaster and Bucky's photography, you can check out my Instagram page at impracticallychristopher. Again, that's impracticallychristopher. And in case you're wondering, yes, I'm a huge fan of Impractical Jokers. That's where the inspiration for the name comes from. And also don't forget to follow Georgia Coaster Connection. That is also on Instagram, and that page is dedicated just to the roller coasters of the state of Georgia, and it's about bringing the Georgia coaster community together, along with anyone else who wants to come and be a part of it. So we have a fun time. Check us out. But again, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.